it tends to be the elephant in the room that leaders or managers aren't trusting their people. And so that always makes me just, I don't quite understand that, because if you trusted the person enough to hire them, then why don't you trust them enough to do their job? That makes no sense to me.
I am Gloria Grace Rand, founder of The Love Method and author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Live, Love, Engage: How to Stop Doubting Yourself and Start Being Yourself. In this podcast, we share practical advice from a spiritual perspective on how to live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically, so you can create a life and business with more impact, influence, and income. Welcome to Live, Love, Engage. Namaste. Do you think putting customers first is a no-brainer? That's likely because you don't have any employees in your business yet. But if hiring plans are in your future, or you already have a team, stick around because you're going to want to hear from today's guest. She is a leadership consultant who transforms workplaces by putting people first. But before I bring her on, I want to welcome any of you who are new to the podcast. I am Gloria Grace, and I help female entrepreneurs release negative thought patterns like self-doubt and poor self-worth so you can attract more clients with calm, clarity, and confidence. And joining us today is Jennifer Nash. She is the founder and CEO of a global leadership advisory and consulting firm that connects people and performance to deliver exceptional results. And she is also the author of the 2023 award-winning book, Be Human, Lead Human: How to Connect People and Performance. And I'm going to bring her right on now without any further ado and welcome you, Jennifer, to Live, Love, Engage.
Thank you, Gloria Grace. I'm excited to be here today.
Well, I'm looking forward to this because I want to learn more about being a good leader. I don't have any employees in my business at the moment. I have had some in the past, and I know eventually I will again. So I thought we'd actually start, just kind of dive right in and talk about why is it important for employers to, I guess, put employees first as opposed to the customers?
Mm-hmm. Well, a couple of years ago, the Business Roundtable signed an agreement with 181 companies that essentially said, all stakeholders are important. And so when we put all of our stakeholders first, we can actually do what's right by them and what's right for the world as a whole. So when we think about putting employees first in the equation, it's about what can we do to create an environment that allows them to flourish and grow. And then in turn, our businesses flourish and grow, and the world is a better place.
Well, that makes sense. And I think it seems to be a challenge, though, yet for a lot of companies out there. I know we've definitely heard a lot about that the last couple
That's an
of years.
understatement, Gloria Grace.
Yeah, the master of that, right? So, let's say that you are an employer out there, or again, if you're maybe a solopreneur and you're looking to start, expanding your team, you're at that place where you're ready to start hiring. So, how can you actually create, an environment that is going to be one that employees are going to want to stay? They're going to want to show up every day for work. Let's put it that way. So how can companies go about doing that?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, there's the element of seeing the employee as not just an employee, but seeing them as a whole human being, right? So, for example, I live in a state where they currently passed legislation to deny people who are working outside building things water breaks. That makes no sense to me. So when you start off from that perspective and you're not giving people what they need from a human rights perspective, you're not in a good place to create an environment where not only people don't want to stay, but the people that are there aren't going to be engaged and really want to give their all to the company.
Yeah, I heard about that, and it's just yeah, it really just boggles the mind because it's kind of like, if mama ain't happy, nobody else is happy. I would think that if your employees aren't happy, then how can your customers then be happy?
Right.
If they're because I've been in situations where you could clearly tell that somebody was really not happy to be there, and it shows in how they treat you as a customer.
Right.
Uh, yeah. So, is there anything? I guess, what can be done besides, giving people their basic, needs, fulfilling their needs like, food and water, um, to really start, I guess, creating this environment, and it's really actually attitude. That's the word I'm looking for, really. This
Mhm.
attitude that's got to start from the top down. So
Mhm.
how can what can be done, I guess, to do that? And is there anything even that employees can do themselves to be able to, um, stick up for themselves short of going on strike or something like that? We've also experienced a lot of that over the last few years as well.
Yes, exactly. Well, I think one of the first things that employers can do is to understand what kind of culture do they want to have in their organization, right? So, for example, I was just working with a client last week and they were telling me how, there were people in the organization who didn't want to work together and they refused to work together actually, but because of the jobs that they were doing, they needed to work together to deliver this product that they were working on. So we talked about, how this leader can create behaviors that are expected in the organization, right? What does that look like? And then the holding people accountable to, you know, abide by those behaviors. And if they choose not to, that's okay. We still love you, but we think you're going to be happier elsewhere. So first and foremost, I think is understanding what kind of culture you want to create in the organization. And then designing the desired behaviors around that culture.
Mm. And so yeah, so that makes perfect sense to be able to do that. Um, what would actually, maybe let me ask it this way. Why do you think some companies, some leaders are so reluctant, to be able to
Mhm.
put this emphasis to really be able to focus? Is it and I'm thinking not even necessarily, I know public companies, get in all into having to be able to, please the shareholders and things like that. But I'm sure this happens a lot in private companies as well. Why do you think there is a reluctance, to focus their attention on their employees?
Mhm. So I think this goes back to Taylor. Taylor was a mechanical engineer. He's known as the father of scientific management. He was one of the first management consultants. And Taylor was someone who wanted to design processes to be optimized. And so he ran time and motion studies to help people figure out what was the fastest way to do their job. And prior to Taylor coming on the scene, workers had figured out the processes that worked best for them, the tools that worked best for them, the timing of, their work that, worked well to get the work done. So they had employee essentially voice and choice and autonomy. And then Taylor came on the scene, redesigned everything, optimized all the processes, and all of a sudden, he's telling people, okay, at this time you pick up this amount of pig iron, you take X number of steps, and then you set it down, and then you take a break for 20 seconds, and then you get up and you do it all over again. And he's walking around with a stopwatch, sort of micromanaging this person as they go through, this time and motion study. And I think as an outcome of that, we got into this space where, managers and leaders became more micromanagers and telling people what to do rather than trusting their employees to do the work in the way that worked best for them so they could optimize their efforts and produce, most effectively for the company. So I think that's one of the things that gets in the way now of, us designing these organizations where employees can thrive, because we still have this outdated thinking around managers and leaders and what their role actually is in the organization.
Yeah, as you were talking, trust was definitely coming to mind as thinking that that seems to be the sort of that key ingredient, and I know that I've talked with other, entrepreneurs over the years on the podcast as well, and I can remember one interview in particular where this was a young man who started an app and was building this company, and he, wanted to make sure that he hired people that were smarter than he is in some key areas because he wanted to be able to, know that he could delegate responsibility to them and trust them to be able to do that. And I know for me too, because I don't pretend to know everything and I don't necessarily want to know everything. And I would love to be able to have someone that I could, is my right hand man, so to speak, to be able to, trust them to be able to get the job done.
Right. Right. I think that's the second element here that is often missing, right? It tends to be the elephant in the room, that leaders or managers aren't trusting their people. And so that always makes me just, I don't quite understand that, because if you trusted the person enough to hire them, then why don't you trust them enough to do their job? That makes no sense to me.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense to me either.
Yeah.
It's very counterintuitive.
Yeah.
Um, I guess maybe it's that some people just really wanna be in control, I guess, just all the time, I
Yeah.
suppose, right?
Yeah, I think
Mm,
that's, probably the third element here that we're talking about, right? It's in traditionally, managers and leaders are people that, have had the control, they have the power. And for some people, they're not comfortable giving up the power, if you will. And they feel that if they give their power away, that they won't have any. But the converse is actually true. When you give your power away, you actually get more power. And so thinking about how the role of a leader and a manager has shifted to be more of a coach and a facilitator these days is a very uncomfortable identity for a lot of leaders and managers, because they didn't grow up with that. It wasn't role model to them, and they don't quite know how to step into that and be that way in that role. So we have also an identity shift happening for
mm,
leaders and managers today, and it's one that, quite honestly, a lot of them aren't comfortable with. And secondly, they don't have the tools in their toolbox to lead
mm,
people. They're
mm.
used to leading projects and tasks, and that's typically what they use to try to lead people. And as you and I both know, that doesn't work very well.
Yeah, definitely, and it really does require a whole different mindset, I think, for you, number 1, to be able to do that, and then yeah, and then acquiring these different skills and being able to, admit that you don't know what you don't sometimes that you don't know what you don't know, and that definitely you don't know everything, and so to be able
Mhm.
to hand that off to someone else. I'm wondering, do you find and, you've worked with, a lot of different, I know, huge companies even especially. Do you find that is it, and I don't wanna necessarily say that we're banging up on men particular, but I think also a lot of women maybe fall into the same trap as well. Have you seen that in like working with different organizations that it doesn't really matter necessarily? We're all kind of focused in on that, that mindset, this more mechanical mindset, I guess you could say.
So I won't go down the gender path on this one, because I
Yeah.
think it applies to people, maybe not
Right.
equally, but I think it applies because, as humans, we learn by mimicking. We learn by emulating the behavior that we see around us, right? Just as babies, that's how we learn. And as adults in the workplace, when we're looking to people around us, we see how they behave and we act in the same way. So thinking about that and thinking about the role models that we've had, there's a tendency for leaders and managers to feel like, oh, they have to have all the answers. and
Mm,
oh, they've got to be right, and they have to, they have to have all the power. And in this volatile, uncertain and complex and ambiguous world we have today, particularly after COVID, i- nothing could be further from the truth. The only way that we will succeed going forward is if we work together. And to
mm,
work together, we have to share, and we have to collaborate, and we have to communicate. And if we don't do that, we risk not only becoming redundant and not relevant, but we also risk putting our businesses out of business.
mm. Well, I'm gonna flip it around here, and let's talk about what are some of the really concrete benefits of putting an employee first, having that philosophy in your company?
Mhm. So I will give you an example of how this worked in a very large organization, and I tell the story of this in my book, Be Human, Lead Human. So there was a CEO that came in to lead a company, and the company wasn't doing very well. In fact, they were losing $17 billion.
Mm,
And the CEO decided, something obviously needs to change here. We're not doing very well. So he decided that we were going to have a culture change. And so he created a system called working together, where there were expected behaviors that were required, right? And they were put on like our badges that we would use, to badge into the doors every day. And they were also put on the walls in meeting rooms. And so, through this combination of culture change and behavior change and, leaders holding their people and their people holding each other and themselves accountable to these new behaviors, going from $17 billion loss to 8 years later, when the CEO left office, the stock price had gone up 1,837%. So that is one of the most powerful examples that I know of, where when you create a culture change with people working together, you can achieve amazing things for the
mm,
organization.
mm. So, if someone listening to this wants to start making some changes, what
Mhm,
would be the first thing you'd recommend they do?
mhm. So I think the first thing that I would recommend they do is go around and ask people, what's one thing that they would change? If they could only change one thing about the
Mm,
organization, what would that be? Right? So essentially go around and do your homework. Go around and do due diligence, ask questions. If you can't get people to talk to you, because often people are a little afraid to talk to the leader or to the
right.
CEO, then bring in a third party and have them conduct, the interviews or the focus groups or however you want to choose to do that. But ask them, what's one thing they would change? Right? You're going to see the numbers from where you sit in the organization. You'll have all of the data that way. But what you're missing are the qualitative pieces from the stories of the people that are on the front lines, that are seeing what doesn't work and what does work. And what, if we just shifted just a tiny bit, maybe would have massive implications for outcomes and results.
Mm,
That's the first thing I would suggest. Gather your data and really understand what it is that you're dealing with.
yeah, absolutely. And would it be, and I'm thinking here now for smaller organizations in particular, small businesses that maybe only have a couple employees, perhaps. Would it also be a good idea to survey their existing customers as well? What do you think?
Absolutely. I don't think it should stay to the internal, organization. I think the more stakeholders you can bring in to that conversation and to that dialogue and gathering those data points, the more holistic picture you will have of what is actually going on.
Mm, okay. Let's talk about you a little bit. So I'm curious to know how you got interested in this subject in the first place.
Well, I mentioned that story about the CEO who is, changing the culture of the organization. And I was working in the organization at that time. So I was able to see things firsthand. And I really wanted to understand why there weren't more leaders who had that approach. Why weren't they able to put their ego aside and, focus on what was best for the organization and for the employees and for the stakeholders? And so that prompted me to go back and do my MBA at the University of Michigan. It prompted me to go to Case Western Reserve and work on my PhD there, and really, start to understand why it is that there aren't more leaders who lead in that way.
Mm,
And the book Be Human, Lead Human has a lot of the research results that I found through that work, as well as what we've discussed today.
Hmm, very cool. I recommend this book. Get it, and I presume it's available where fine books are sold, I presume?
Yeah, anywhere people like to prefer to buy their books, it should be there, and if they don't have it on the shelf, they can order it.
Alright, very
Mhm.
good. Um, what is a commonly held belief about leadership that you passionately disagree with?
So I think a commonly held belief about leadership that I disagree with is that it is all about other people. I believe that to be an effective leader, you have to lead yourself first. And so if you're not emotionally managing yourself, if you're not role modeling the behaviors that you expect to see in others, if you're not demonstrating the type of interactions and collaboration and communication that you want to see from other people, then how do you expect the people around you to do that? So I always say it starts with you, right? You have to manage yourself first. And that includes, the emotional intelligence levels, right? Making sure that you're not yelling at people, making sure that you're not having outbursts, in a lunch in a busy New York restaurant in the middle of the day where everyone is staring at you. Like making sure that you have the ability to manage your emotional self so that you can present an equanimity, to the organization, so that they don't catch, the emotion. We know that you catch emotions in milliseconds, and so managing that for yourself will help your organizational tenor.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree. It definitely starts within, and you can practice again just with leading, not only leading yourself, but I would think even, leading your family. How are you interacting with
Mhm.
them as
Yeah.
well? Because all of these things add up. And so it's so important if you're having trouble with your employees, maybe think about, okay, well, how do I manage my children? Maybe maybe there's some lessons there. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I often, people often ask me, well, this is only for work. I'm only working, I'm only doing coaching because this is for work. And I often like to, invite them to think about the fact that, well, are you a different person at home? Like, do you have different values that you use at home to guide your behavior rather than the values that you're using at work? If you're two different people in those two places, we may have other issues and you may need to talk to a therapist, right? Like I can't help you with that. But, I often invite people to think about the fact that, like, who they are as a person has everything to do with who they are as a leader, right?
Mm,
It's the values that we have and what is important to us and what we prioritize that guides our decision making. And whether that's in the personal realm or whether that's in the professional realm, right? It's all one realm.
mm. Yeah, definitely. Oh, I love that. Excellent advice. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and just talk about. I love to ask our guests this question because I love to see the range of answers that we get. So, love to know, what are you curious about right now?
Oh, so right now I'm very curious about AI. So I've been doing some learning about AI and taking a couple classes, and I'm not a software person or a programmer. So the whole like technical part of AI is a little unclear to me. So I've wanted to just learn more about AI because it has drastic implications for how it is going to impact our workplaces and the work that we do and how we interact with one another. So that's something that really interests me right now, not only from a personal level, because I'm super interested in just learning more and I have a natural curiosity about things, but also like how it's shifting the world of work and what
Mm,
that's going to look like going forward.
yeah. Well, I look forward to maybe seeing what you come up with about that because, yeah, you're right. It's definitely impacting organizations in lots of ways that they haven't even thought of yet. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what comes from that.
Mhm.
Is there anything else that I should have asked you about that I didn't? Any other important points that you'd like to share about, employees and their business culture?
Mhm. I think COVID was one of the few benefits that came out of COVID is that employees learned that they have voice and choice and autonomy, right? And they can choose where they want to work. They can choose what that work looks like. And they learned that they don't have to be stuck in where we were before because
Mm,
now they have other options, right? And I think the balance of that power shift made a lot of organizational leaders uncertain, right? And I would encourage, employees to think about right now the fact that you still have options, right? If you're in a place where you're not happy with how things are going, or you don't like the culture, or it's just a mismatch, right? And you're not happy with the work that you're doing, there are other opportunities for you to find some place that you will land that will be a better fit for you, where you can achieve your potential and you will be happier and the organization will be happier.
mm,
So I think just keeping that in mind, because sometimes it's hard to remember that, especially with everything going on with AI right now, right? People are very afraid
mhm,
of losing their jobs to AI, and people are also afraid of losing their jobs to a robot.
mm.
I've heard that as well.
Yeah.
And historically, what we see is that even though technology will displace jobs, it creates more jobs than it displaces.
Yeah, that's
So
true.
when you think about it that way, there are jobs that will exist that we don't know about yet. But there are some jobs that are coming into being that, maybe people are interested in, like a prompt engineer, right? Helping
Mhm,
organizations figure out how do they interact with AI most effectively to get the most out of it so that they can accelerate the work that is sort of the administrivia kind of work, and then spend more of their time on the things that make us more human, like the
mm.
collaboration and the creativity and the
Right.
communication.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I would encourage people to just remember that there are always more opportunities. It just may require a shift in how you're thinking.
Mm. And I'm gonna also push back a little bit, and I'm from the employer standpoint, because it is good to know that employees have options, and I know, like, I know
Mhm,
my son is looking, for a different job because he's not totally
mhm,
satisfied with the company he's working for.
sure,
But I've also heard on the other side of it, I've got a good friend who is saying that they keep going through, assistance every week. They just can't find someone who is willing to stay the course. And
mhm,
so, what do you say to, and I'm trusting, I know she is a very open-hearted, good-hearted person, and I've met her husband, and I'm sure that they're not, they don't own a sweatshop, and I'm sure they're providing good, an environment, but still, what do you say to employers like that?
So to employers who are having trouble filling a particular role, I would say, take a look at the role itself. What are you asking people to do?
Mm,
And look in particular at the skills that you are asking for people, right?
mm,
We're seeing a shift right now in organizations that they're moving to a skills-based model. So rather than hiring for a particular job title or a role, they're looking to bring in people that have the skills that they can be effective in a particular position and then train them to do the rest of the job. So I don't know what the situation is exactly with your colleague and their administrative assistant job, but I would venture to guess that perhaps there's a mismatch there in terms of expectations and skills coming in the door.
mm. Yeah, that makes sense, and I'll have to talk to her about it and say see how are things going, so, or point her to this episode and say, "Here, check it out." Uh, Thank you so much. Because that really is good advice, and I know that ultimately, I would encourage employers out there to, think about, again, why did you go into business in the first place, and what is it that you want to accomplish, and how can you
Mhm.
best do that? And if you're not focusing on keeping those employees happy, then it's going to be a lot harder to be able to accomplish your goals of then keeping your customers happy. So it, you know, do some soul searching about that and realize you can be friends and, well, not necessarily friends, but you could be partners. Think of your employees maybe as more as partners and stakeholders,
Mhm.
right?
Yes, one of the things I often recommend is that, you know, um, understand the people that are coming in the door to share in your business's success, right? What is it that motivates them about your company or about your mission or about the work that you do or the impact that you have in the world, right? Understand who they are as a person. And if you can understand what motivates them and what drives them, and then connect that to the work that they will be doing for you, um,
Mhm.
you probably won't have any other problems.
Yeah, sounds good to me. Good advice. Awesome. Well, if someone has been listening to this today and would like more information about you and maybe get your book, is there a place that people can go to connect with you?
Mhm, sure. So they can go online. My website is drjennifernash.com. That's drjennifernash.com. And there they'll find a whole bunch of information about what I do, a lot of different resources that are complementary. And there's also, we didn't talk about this, but there's the Human Leader Index online as well at my website, which is also complimentary. And they can take that, get an assessment of where they fall in the Human Leader Index, and then get a personalized report with some recommendations on what they might consider changing going forward.
Oh, I love that. That's a very good idea. So
Mhm.
be sure and check that out. And for those of you listening, go to the show notes. You will see the link to Dr. Jennifer's web address, and you'll be able to go there and check that information out. So thank you so much again for being with us. I really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule and enlightening us on employer employee relations and how to improve them.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Gloria Grace. It was a pleasure.
Yeah. And I do want to thank all of you as well for joining us today and for listening and watching. And if you are not subscribed yet on your favorite podcast platform, please do so. And on YouTube at Gloria Grace Rand. And until next time, I encourage you to go out and live fully, love deeply, and engage authentically.